The women's hands were clasped in a pleading gesture, as if someone was praying to all the gods at once. A girl with purple hair and eyes of the same color was kneeling. Large tears froze in her huge eyes. Rudis didn't understand what was happening. She was called to the throne room in the middle of the night. Her father was sitting on the throne. His wife, as always, was at his right hand. Barthold Amaryllis was famous for his tough and unprincipled character. It was almost impossible to move him to pity. The high priest, who occupied his place at the emperor's throne, tried to say something. But the master cut short this attempt with a menacing roar. Father's voice echoed throughout the hall. He was saying that peace would only come to the Vishyo Empire in one case, if the right sacrifice was made. The emperor did not want to live in darkness any longer. He wanted to enjoy every day. His finger pointed towards the girl. Rudis Amaryllis was the second princess of the Vishyo Empire, and it was to her that the gentleman was now pointing. It was this unfortunate woman who was chosen to be the offering to the ancient deities. After all, at that very moment, dozens of people were dying from a terrible misfortune. Now, only the capital and a few surrounding areas were safe. The rest of the regions fell victim to the terrible invasion. The girl with the dragonfly hair clip in her purple hair knew it, but she couldn't believe what was happening. After all, she didn't want to give up her life, but her father said that everything had already been decided, and there was no way back, and the daughter should be proud that she will sacrifice herself to save her home. She will become a saint to atone for the sins of the empire. The gentleman continued, "In order to summon a deity with unprecedented power, one must sacrifice someone from the royal family. The princess must have known this." The emperor's neatly trimmed beard trembled, and his lips were tightly pressed together. Rudis couldn't hold back her tears. This ritual was really important for the people. The girl understood it well, but Selena could become such a victim. Princess Selena Amaryllis was a beautiful blonde with bright blue eyes, with a rose in her light curls. She herself was like a rosebud. It was impossible to sacrifice Selena instead of Rudis, and the master did not return to this question. Everything was finally decided. The high priest said that only a member of the royal family could be the offering, but Selene had purer blood. The Lord ignored these words. Rudis was still kneeling. She had been useless all her life. Now she was the only one who could help everyone. The emperor did not lie. The girl was born from a commoner, and now a good opportunity arose to get rid of such a disgrace. The poor girl sat on the floor of the throne room. Her own father avoided her. She was a child no one needed. An annoying misunderstanding. The princess folded her hands again, as if in prayer, or a silent plea to all the gods that exist in the world. The emperor said through clenched teeth that this ungrateful woman should be glad that she would be of at least some use to the empire. The high priest turned to the emperor again, asking if he was sure that the deity he had summoned would hear their prayers. Rudis was silently sobbing and bowing low, begging for mercy. Blood appeared on her forehead from the blows on the marble floor. The gentleman sitting on the throne made a gesture with his index finger, pointing at this pathetic bastard. Two knights grabbed the unfortunate woman by the arms and dragged her away. The girl alternately screamed her father's name and begged Selena to save her. Tears and blood dripped onto the exquisite marble floor of the throne room. The fair-haired lady watched this scene from a distance, almost indifferently, but a cruel smile played on her lips. The gentleman in the strict uniform watched the knights leading away the resisting girl, and slowly nodded his head. A few minutes later, the young victim was thrown onto the cobblestones. The unfortunate girl did not understand why her father had been so cruel to her. In the main temple, a sacred ritual was being held. The high priest was calling upon an ancient deity from the depths of eternity. Those who needed his power were calling upon the mighty one. The purple-haired victim sat on the floor in the center of a pentacle drawn in blood. The priest chanted for the one who would fight them and save the land drenched in blood. In return, they offered a child of the most noble family of all, one who could unite the many families of the lands of Vishyo. The girl in the circle was writhing in pain. Her scream was almost inhuman. Her body was burning from the inside, as if hot lava was flowing through her veins. Her eardrums were bursting. Suddenly, the pain subsided. The girl sat on the floor and did not understand what had happened. Stone gates opened before her eyes. Only one thought kept repeating in her head. She didn't want to die, to disappear like that. The hand stretched forward seemed to be preventing something terrible from approaching. A dark shadow that was inevitably approaching. But it was getting closer. Suddenly, a dragonfly-shaped hairpin appeared in her hand, with a blade-like tip, like a small dagger that brought death. In desperation, the girl threw her hand with the dagger forward and pierced the dark creature. Blood oozed from the wound, flowing down the thin wrist with the dagger. Rudis rose from the ground. Tears of fear and despair flowed from her eyes, like mountain waterfalls. She did not understand what kind of dark creature had just tried to kill her. Suddenly, two huge yellow eyes appeared before the desperate girl. The narrow pupils resembled those of a snake, or maybe a dragon. Her whole body ached unbearably. Perhaps this was the end of her life's journey. She prayed for help, for someone to come and save the unfortunate woman. Even if her sacrifice was not in vain, even if she saved someone, the young princess just wanted to live. As if in a dream, someone's hand touched her, supported her by the waist, and someone strong helped her to stand and not fall into the abyss of oblivion. A young man with the same purple hair touched her forehead with his lips. But it seemed that it was not reality, but a nightmare that comes to its victim on dark nights. The princess begged for mercy. Again and again she called on her father not to act so cruelly, and she asked him to save her daughter. But the cruel phrases hit like a whip, that she was the daughter of a commoner, an unloved bastard, a wretched thing, unworthy of happiness. These terrible words were absolutely true. The girl's life turned into a living hell, in which the girl lived for 20 years. A child born with any kind of abnormality into the royal family was doomed to be an outcast, like a pathetic piece of trash that no one would give alms to. Because of a leg crippled since infancy, the girl withdrew into herself as a child and led a quiet and modest life, just begging God to grant her at least a drop of love. But her own father signed his daughter's death warrant. The end of the victim is the same in all times, to die in terrible agony. Her fate is to be torn to pieces and eaten by a terrible beast. Princess Rudis asked herself again and again, what was her fault? What did the girl do wrong in life? One day, a thought crept into her head. What if she was not carrying her own cross? It could be the father's sin, for which the daughter was destined to pay. Is it possible that it was not the girl's fault? That of the emperor's 2 daughters, one was unloved. It was so unfair. Tears of despair filled the huge eyes again. All the troubles of the noble family fell only on this unfortunate one. It was now that the memory of that spring came to mind. That was when the little girl ran away from her bedroom for the first time. It was this vision that flashed before her death. If only she could escape the terrible clutches of death alive, the princess would never commit any more rash acts. I wouldn't sacrifice my life pursuing an impossible dream. I would only care about myself, and I would live freely. Suddenly, the singing of birds interrupted these bitter thoughts. A light breeze swayed the curtains in the room. The girl opened her eyes. She was lying on a soft bed. It was a beautiful, sunny day outside. The princess did not understand what had happened to her. Perhaps it was just a bad dream. Suddenly, as if in reality, I felt a fire that consumed my entire body. The pain spread throughout my stomach. The air was so hot that I couldn't take even one breath. These feelings couldn't be a dream. They echoed so clearly in every cell. Rudis wondered what had happened. I clearly remembered that her father had given his daughter to certain death, and how they were going to sacrifice the unfortunate girl. And then there was only her own cry, about not wanting to die, and a fervent plea to all the gods for help, and that dragonfly-shaped dagger pin, stuck in dark flesh, and the victim's blood flowing down the thin wrist. The girl touched her head with her hand, as if checking if everything was okay. The slight pain was still present. She raised herself up on her elbow, and, as if in the distance, she heard voices behind her. There were many of them, and they were all talking at once. They wondered if she had slept well and if the princess needed anything, perhaps a glass of water, and they wondered what would happen to Selena now. Rudy suddenly realized that she was still alive. It was unclear how this was possible. It seemed that the sacrifice ceremony had failed. Besides, this room was so warm, beautiful, and sunny, like in the palace of a real princess. Suddenly, the girl realized that she was in her sister's room. Before, she could only dream of visiting her, even for a minute. Even Selena's maids were from noble families, and none of them treated Rudy's with the respect she deserved. The girl tried to say something, but couldn't utter a word. Her throat was dry, and only wheezing came out. The servants immediately began to bustle about. Someone brought a glass of water and raised it to her mouth. Others carefully held her head while she drank. The maids caught every gesture of the princess. They anticipated every desire. Something incredible was happening. Rudy's knew that all these girls were Selena's servants, but they hated her wretched sister all their lives, even despised her. One of the girls stood out from the rest. She stood out in a strict blue dress with a bow. She was interested in the well-being of Her Highness and reported that the Emperor would arrive soon. Lady Ivana never addressed Rudy's by her title. She called her a wretched thing, not worthy of being a princess, especially not the sister of the magnificent Selena. Once the princess was even locked in the attic, where she had to eat spoiled bread. She was sometimes treated worse than slaves. All this was because of dirty blood. The young lady, Countess Cluden, asked if the princess still felt pain. After all, she could call the high priest. Before, all these ladies ignored Rudy's. Suddenly, a fear flashed through her mind. Maybe the girls were plotting something against her. The lady sat on the luxurious bed. She only tried to formulate some phrase, as the servants immediately began to move. They caught every letter, every glance. Everything that was happening resembled a theater of the absurd. The princess asked everyone to leave. Let every single one of them leave the room. Loudly and insistently, the girl repeated, "Let the ladies go away." And suddenly she cringed, afraid that she would be hit. After all, she had certainly hurt someone's pride. Lady Ivana was still standing by the bed. There was a shadow of a smile on her lips. She had hated Rudy's all her life. Now she bowed slightly. The maid was very sorry that she had previously committed several impermissible liberties with Her Highness. At the same time, she smiled insincerely. Rudy's was shocked by what she heard. Now this snake is simply expressing regret for all the evil that it did. The princess did not understand what Lady Ivana was trying to achieve, but she only sighed angrily that Her Highness had always envied Lady Selena. This was true, but the girl did not at all strive for luxury and the countless number of servants that her sister had. She wanted to have the love that was given to Selena, even for a short time. After all, she was the same princess. But now, Rudy's knew that her family had never really cared about her. Now she didn't want this fake love anymore. The princess no longer wanted to see them. Her father, Selena, and everyone who was with them. All her life, she wagged her tail like an abandoned puppy. She was looking for a little love and affection. But all she got was beatings. Rudy's inherited the blood of the emperor, who defeated and dethroned his father, and was able to rise to the top. But she had no right to be among the elite, especially to be near her father. A pathetic, unloved princess. Lady Ivana smiled, but her angry face showed all the complaints she had against the princess, that she had envied Selena all her life, and could only look at her. This black envy was clearly visible to everyone. However, as was the absurd dream of changing places with the beautiful Selena. All the maids laughed at the crazy woman behind her back. Rudy's repeated her request in a firm voice. Addressing Lady Ivana directly, she ordered her to leave the room. The maid lifted her skirts and approached the bed. She muttered that the princess had just woken up and seemed to be still in her senses, and she would greatly regret throwing her out. Just yesterday, Rudy's would have been very scared by such speeches, but now these bold words were empty space. Compared to that nightmare, the princess did not change her mind. Lady Ivana's presence was tiring her. Therefore, she insisted that she leave the bedroom. Otherwise, the princess will leave this room herself, if only because it belongs to her sister Selena. As soon as the girl said these words, the servants became agitated. They begged her not to leave. After all, they would all be severely punished in that case. Rudy's was very surprised. She did not understand who could punish the servants just because the princess crossed the threshold of this bedroom. The only person who could do this was my father. He must have had something up his sleeve. Suddenly, Excited voices were heard from behind the door. The guards were not letting the visitor in. By order of the emperor, no one could enter this room. Someone tried to open the door, but the guards strictly followed the order of the head of the empire. They insisted that this could not be done. But eventually, the door swung open, and an enraged Princess Selena flew into the room. As always, she looked perfect, but she was furious. Pointing at her sister in her bed, she screamed, wanted to know why this freak had taken over her room. She was surprised that she couldn't get into her bedroom. And all because of the scoundrel who imagined herself a real princess. Selena screamed that she would figure it out herself. She ran up to her sister and grabbed her by the lace collar of her nightgown, tried to pull her out of bed, ordered her to get out. After all, this is not the princess's room. An imposter. I wondered what my father was thinking about then. Rudis was surprised to notice that she was no longer afraid. Before, the girl would have resigned herself to her fate, but now her body felt so light. Selena was taken aback. This girl dared to ignore her. It just couldn't be. Always so inconspicuous, now she showed her teeth. The enraged favorite of her father raised her hand, intending to hit her sister. Out of habit, she lowered her head, expecting a beating. But suddenly, someone grabbed her hand, not allowing her to strike. Esther's maid stood up for Princess Rudis. Selena wondered how Esther could do such a thing. Go against her mistress. It was all very strange. It was necessary to sort it all out immediately. The sacrificial ceremony took place 3 days ago. The emperor was apparently not pleased. The high priest was also worried. Selena even suggested that her father spend time together drinking tea. But he was very tense and kept silent the whole time. The princess also tried to discuss the matter with Prince Arcas, but he refused to meet. But the worst thing was that Rudis would return to the palace as soon as the treatment was over. The thought was simply unbearable. Suddenly, a thought flashed through the pretty blonde's head, that perhaps this was some kind of prank. A ridiculous joke. The girl wanted to ask her father directly, but he was thoughtful and did not even listen to his daughter. Selena decided to ask Esther herself, but she only reminded her that the princesses were connected by family ties, and warned against rash actions, so that something irreparable for everyone around would not happen. The princess did not believe what she heard. Selena was furious that this servant dared to talk to her like that. After all, before she had not dared to open her mouth. Both betrayal and rage were familiar to Rudis. The unloved girl often faced such feelings, but Selena wasn't used to this. She didn't even scream. She squealed that she would tell Daddy everything, and all the scoundrels would pay for everything. The maids didn't know what to do. His Majesty's orders were above all else, not just the emperor's, but also the high priest's. Besides, the whole situation was a secret to Rudis. Suddenly, the guards shouted for the way to be cleared. His Imperial Majesty had arrived. Everyone instantly turned their heads towards the doors. Father entered the bedroom with a precise, measured step. He looked very stern. As always, though, he walked across the room straight to the bed, where his daughter Rudis was still sitting. Without paying attention to anyone, he addressed her by name. However, Selena was not used to being ignored like that, and she began to complain with tears that Princess Ivana was talking complete nonsense, that the princess's room was given to Rudis. She asked her father to rein in the impudent girl. Let them throw the impostor out of the real princess's chambers. The emperor calmed his daughter with just one look and called on her to behave decently. The father said that he did not want to listen to his daughter's hysterics, and in a rough voice, he ordered her to shut her mouth. And finally, learn the rules of decency. The beloved princess was shocked. Her father had never raised his voice to her. Especially, he had never said such words. And the most offensive thing was that it was in front of strangers. He covered his face with his hands and apologized. He said that now was a very difficult time. The daughter remained silent, but it was the first and last time. The emperor looked up at Rudis. She was tense and didn't know how to act. The maid stood there bowing slightly the whole time. The father asked if his daughter Rudis had slept well. There were faint hints of concern in his tone, and the unloved girl had only her constant characteristics in her head: pathetic, worthless, and despised by everyone. All this was visible in the eyes of her father, who hated her. He believed that the girl could only drag out her miserable existence. Her whole life consisted of this, but now the girl had cast aside all hope, as if that incinerating fire inside her had burned away all the past. The emperor ordered the princess to get up from her bed and follow him. However, the girl did not move. He got furious. It seemed the girl had gone deaf. He grabbed her by the shoulder with his hand. He shouted the order again. Rudis raised her purple eyes and looked straight into her father's face. She had not dared to do this before. The emperor pulled his hand back. For some reason, this look made him feel cold and scared, as if someone had touched his heart with cold fingers. There was a bottomless, icy ocean in the purple eyes. This frost seemed to come from an abandoned temple. The gentleman was angry with himself. He cursed himself for even thinking about such a thing. In front of him was the same mudblood, a pathetic and worthless cripple. The father barked at the girl again, to get out of bed and follow where he ordered. The girl looked boldly into His Majesty's eyes, and in a firm voice asked why she should do this. No one expected this from her, not even Rudis herself. The air in the bedroom seemed to freeze. Everyone was afraid to even breathe. This impudent woman dared to contradict the order of the emperor himself. She had just refused to follow his order. But the girl looked him in the eyes and did not shy away, as she always did. She only asked, clearly pronouncing each word, why she should go with her father. It seemed that he wanted to sacrifice the princess again. Fury consumed the emperor, his face distorted. No one dared to speak like that to a superior. His hand was already raised to strike, but the girl only said that her father could no longer harm her. And although tears were rolling from her eyes, her gaze was as hard as steel. The emperor, helpless, lowered his hand, raised to strike. Rudis noted that he was pathetic at that moment. The girl had something to say, something to warn about. Having renounced the throne, Princess Ivana has chosen an alternative path to her rise in society. Many of those present here are eager to show off. Therefore, the emperor is forced to think through every step so as not to become a reason for gossip. Rudis was surprised at herself. It took her 20 years to understand his rotten nature. The girl got up from the bed. Although she didn't want to follow the order, the princess needed to understand something. Why had everyone's attitude towards her changed so much? But as soon as I stepped on my left leg, a sharp pain pierced it. The leg was dark, and it was precisely because of this crippled leg that it was difficult to walk. The maid rushed to the princess, offering to help, but the girl refused. She was used to always managing on her own. The emperor was already leaving the room, ordered his daughter to follow him on the go and not waste time in vain. The girl heard her sister's hysterical cries as she walked. She was arguing with the maids. But Rudis ordered herself not to be distracted, but to concentrate on walking. The father led the girl into the study. The interior of the room was striking in its luxury. As soon as he opened the massive doors, the gentleman froze. The high priest Bennett was sitting on the sofa. He rose abruptly from his seat at the sight of those who entered, and hurried to meet them. But he did not stop near the emperor and his guards. Instead, he went straight to the girl. He folded his hands in front of him and sincerely greeted Her Highness Princess Rudis, who smiled slightly in response. During the ceremony, this man was the only one who looked at the victim with pity, and it seemed that he was the only one who was happy that the princess was alive. Bennett bustled about. He led the girl to a chair. After all, she was still very weak, and the body quickly got tired if you stood for a long time. The emperor ordered the guards to leave the office. The conversation promised to be private, more like secret. The emperor leaned forward and asked the high priest forcefully if this was really the one he needed. The minister of faith confirmed this. After all, he had not the slightest doubt about it. Rudis did not understand at all what the men were talking about. The father asked if he really believed that this was an ancient god. It simply couldn't be. After all, the summoned gods descended into this world only after they had drunk all the blood of the victim. But Rudis was alive. The high priest confirmed that he too had doubts at first. But the sacrifice ceremony was a success, and this is the one everyone was waiting for. The gentleman started shouting. He insisted that the summoned one was not following the emperor's orders. He was not listening to him. But the minister of faith retorted that the ancient god could only listen to the wishes of the summoner, but not necessarily fulfill them. After all, there was a big difference between a request and an order. Besides, the gods still showed benevolence towards Princess Rudis, even though she was his victim. This could help in the matter. Suddenly, His Majesty interrupted his interlocutor in mid-sentence, and he ordered the high priest to be silent. The girl must not know anything. She had already allowed herself too much. Rudy still didn't understand anything, but she had learned to be silent throughout her life. However, she analyzed everything she heard. It was all very strange. Suddenly, the emperor suggested performing the ceremony again, to summon a deity who was easier to manipulate. These were the words of a true tyrant. Rudy spoke up. She was not going to be a victim anymore. And she said it firmly. The emperor choked with rage. He only had to wish for this girl to be flogged half to death, and then thrown into a stone crypt to die. Only thanks to her father was this ungrateful girl alive at all. No one would have bothered with her. They would have strangled her right after birth. Rudy's had lived in the bonds of fear before. But now everything was different. There was nothing holding her back anymore. Looking up, she said that Selena was more suited to the role of a victim. At the same moment, she received a blow to the face. The emperor was not going to hold back. This ungrateful woman answered her father so brazenly. She wanted to sacrifice someone from the pure-blooded royal family, and she was shaking for her worthless life. Rudis raised her purple eyes. She asked what she should be grateful for. After all, she had known only eternal mockery in life. The emperor growled and hit the unfortunate woman again. Blood flowed from her mouth. Red drops flowed onto the carpet. Selena was his true daughter, not this bastard. The blows rained down again and again. The high priest was afraid for the girl. After all, the master could kill her. But he shouted that he had to go through humiliation so that the nobles would recognize this wretched bastard as a princess, a cripple born from a commoner. He asked why this ungrateful woman ignores orders, does not carry them out, and resists the will of her master. The girl herself was surprised that only now she rebelled. She had been too naive before, and she wanted to get at least a piece of love from her father. The emperor stopped mid-sentence when Rudis looked at him. Her eyes. Something had clearly changed in them since the ceremony. However, no one could resist the Lord. Not the young high priest, Duke Ivana, who refused to participate in the ceremony. He was eager to seize the throne, not Rudy's mother, not herself. There is no such person who would not follow the path prepared by the emperor, and such an insignificant girl was no exception. The powerful hand grabbed the purple hair. Suddenly, the door to the office opened. A young man stood on the threshold. He was cold as metal and calm as the moon. The person who entered quietly asked what noise he heard. After all, the man asked to bring the girl, and then wake him up. The high priest jumped up from his seat, and the emperor let go of his daughter's hair. Both stood frozen in stupor. The man with yellow eyes and vertical pupils came closer. Both men bowed and greeted the ancient great deity. The girl sitting on the floor was perplexed. It turns out there was a person with whom the father could be so polite. I wondered who he really was. An ordinary-looking young man. But his eyes were captivating and attractive. The dark-haired guy came closer and looked at Princess Rudis, sitting on the floor with a bloody face. The man approached and asked the high priest if this was the girl he had sent for. He bowed and answered in the affirmative. The princess suddenly felt an inexplicable warmth that spread throughout her body. Slightly stumbling, she asked the man who he was. He brought his face closer. His hair fell on his forehead, and his eyes were only slightly visible through it. The visitor noted that Rudis must know him, but she had no idea about it, no matter how hard she tried to fish something out of the depths of her memory. Then the man said his name, Levane. As expected, the girl did not know this man. The yellow eyes from under her bangs lingered briefly on the embarrassed, tear-stained face. She had never really seen this guy, but that look. The stranger looked somehow special, as if he was reaching into the very depths of consciousness. The man tried to direct the girl's memory in the right direction. But then he said that he was the one who was imprisoned in the crypt. Rudis felt like she had been electrocuted. Yes, she had seen something in that searing darkness, but she didn't believe that this guy was the monster. The princess clearly remembered the huge yellow eyes. It turns out that he was the very deity that was summoned with the help of the sacrifice. They existed in the pitch darkness before all living things appeared. At first, they were called gods, but they were not. These were demons with inhuman strength. All they needed from humans was flesh and blood. And it turned out that this was the ancient deity in the dark crypt. But demons must take the form of terrible monsters. And this young man was very handsome and courageous. Levane pulled back slightly, asked the girl to trust him, and to tell him if something didn't suit her. The demon touched the princess's cheek with his palm, and slightly moved the hair. Traces of beatings and bloody streaks were visible on her face. He extended his hand, helping her to get into a more comfortable position, and sympathetically sympathized with the girl for what they did to her. The memory of the monster in the stone crypt was still very fresh, and she almost resigned herself. But the creature that the victim feared so much was kind to her. But the demon reassured her that he would not hurt the princess, and asked her not to worry. He could even deal with those who had caused so much harm to the sufferer. After all, she was very scared, and she didn't quite trust the stranger, but he wanted to prove that he wasn't dangerous. After all, the girl was the reason the demon came into this world, the beautiful young maiden who saved him. And again, he touched the beauty's face with his hand. His eyes attracted her like a magnet, and in her eyes a sea of purple splashed. Again, that all-pervading heat spread through the body, but it did not burn out all that existed, as it had done that time. Instead, it filled every cell with warmth. All this was from the demon's hot hand. The emperor and the high priest stood there in a slight bow, and they could not believe what was happening, that the monster had not swallowed the victim, but was showing sympathy towards her. Levane still had his hand on the girl's cheek, and he hadn't hurt her. That was his proof. Rudy's came to her senses a little. It turned out that it really was that demon. Its existence was connected to that magic circle and the sacrifice. If the princess disappears, he will disappear too, and the dark demon will be forced to return back to the world of chaos. And the girl was his savior. Chaos was the world that creatures wanted to leave, even if it meant fulfilling someone else's will. It turned out that the demon was happy to escape from there, just like Rudy's herself ran away from her past. The girl wasn't sure yet that she could fully trust the stranger, but his hand and the warmth coming from her gave hope for the best. With the help of the young man, the princess stood up and accidentally stepped on her sore foot. A sharp pain pierced her foot, or rather, spread throughout her entire body. But suddenly it passed, as if it had never happened. It was incredible. After all, the girl had lived with this pain all her life. Suddenly, the emperor spoke up. He noticed that he had brought the one the demon had asked for, and now he was demanding to get his own. After all, even an ancient deity had to understand that he received a body only thanks to a call, and fulfill his obligations. His Majesty bowed slightly. A powerful grin was frozen on his face. He asked Mr. Levane to fulfill the emperor's request. Rudy's remembered her father's words after the sacrifice. He had shouted that the summoned one had no intention of obeying and following the emperor's orders. If the ancient deity did not obey orders, it meant it wanted to meet its victim. It turned out that as long as Rudy's was here, nothing could harm the demon. Levane raised his yellow eyes and looked at the emperor. His gaze did not bode well. So, the master wanted the demon to fulfill the request. Well, he agreed. But first, the emperor must hand over his powers, and then the new emperor will have to listen to the request of the subordinate. His Majesty thought he had misheard. He asked to clarify what Mr. Levane had just said. Rudy's was confused. She didn't understand why the sacrifice didn't work as intended. Then the demon spoke. Thousands of years had passed since humans began using rituals, but none of them had ever understood how they worked. After all, nowhere did it say that after the summoning, the demon becomes the property of the summoner. The emperor was furious. The monster had asked for a sacrifice, and it had been given to him. If it had not been for the will of the deity, this filthy bastard would have been dead in infancy. She had been saved for sacrifice. Even now, the father pretended to love and care for his daughter, but it was only to gain the grace of the ancient god. Rudy's knew that she was used, that she was like trash to her family, but it hurt so much inside. The emperor continued, The ancient manuscripts said that the ancient deity must submit to the will of the summoner. In exchange, receive its sacrifice. And the emperor was the one who summoned the demon and gave him his daughter of royal blood as a gift. So the deity must obey him personally and strictly follow his orders. Levaine's face darkened. His eyes flashed yellow. The emperor seemed struck by lightning. His angry speech choked in mid-sentence. The demon hadn't seen people like this for a long time. He imagined himself a god with unlimited power. In reality, he was a simple mortal with a dark soul. Suddenly, the gentleman grabbed his head. It was as if a red-hot iron had bitten into his brain. An inhuman scream escaped from his lips, the same ones that had recently ordered him to obey. The emperor collapsed to the floor as if he had been mown down. Only hoarse groans came from his mouth. The high priest rushed to his master. Levain looked down at the fallen emperor and growled at the worthless wretch not to dare give orders to the demon. Rudis was astonished. Her formidable father was kneeling at the feet of the young man. The all-powerful emperor had surrendered so quickly. The high priest approached and bowed low to the ancient deity. The demon gave him permission to speak. The minister of faith expressed respect for Mr. Levain. He was not so impudent as to disobey orders. However, he reminded me of the agreement. According to it, the ancient deity was called upon for immediate assistance. According to the terms of the summoning contract, the ancient deity was obligated to help the people. Thousands of people were dying in the kingdom, and they really needed help. Bennett bowed even deeper. He had not initiated the sacrifice of Princess Rudis, but he had performed the ritual of sacrifice in the hope of salvation. The ancient manuscripts said that the ritual was supposed to be beneficial to both parties, although this issue had not yet been fully studied. And again, the high priest prayed for help. Levain winced. His answer was the same. He was not going to help these cruel people, or fulfill their every whim. The princess thought about the demon's words. He did not want to do a favor and help the summoners. His purpose for being here was not clear then. The victim had to die during the ceremony, give blood and flesh to the demon, but still remained alive. The high priest's face was white as chalk. He understood everything. There would be no help. In despair, he asked what would happen to the empire. The ancient god placed his hand on his chest, as if swearing an oath. He was summoned into this world by Princess Rudis, and all the demon's power belongs to her. The minister of faith and the emperor were in shock. However, as was the girl herself. Both froze and silently pondered the master's speech. But he did not react to their state. Bennett looked at His Majesty, who remained silent. The emperor asked with some uncertainty what was going on. Now everything depended on the princess. Levain confirmed. If the princess doesn't want something, he won't lift a finger for these worthless people. The princess simply could not believe what was happening. Now the ancient deity had to carry out her orders. Only hers. The emperor was still on his knees, but he cried out that this could not be. It was simply impossible. But Levain calmly advised him to think it over carefully. If the emperor wanted to save the empire, he had to do one simple thing. Kneel before Princess Rudis. Before the daughter, he had humiliated all his life. The emperor looked away with an unseeing gaze. Then he looked for a while into the yellow eyes of the demon, and silently left the room. Levain turned to the high priest to heal the princess's leg. The priest bowed and agreed to perform the healing ritual. He gave his princess his hand and invited her to come with him. The demon looked at the girl encouragingly, as if saying that everything would be fine. Rudis was very scared. No one had ever helped her in her entire life. She had rarely heard even a kind word. The father could show up at any moment. After everything that had happened, he was quite capable of taking out all his anger on his unloved daughter. The demon left the room. The girl turned to the minister of faith. She wanted to know what the supreme god could do now, but he himself did not know. After all, the demon was not a human. Besides, he had not appeared in this world for long, and the priest knew little about the lives of creatures outside of chaos. Just when he thought the Dark One had left, he would suddenly appear next to him, and vice versa. When Bennett didn't feel his presence, he would be a few centimeters away. The princess would soon understand this herself. The treatment of the sore leg was completed, and the high priest offered to take the girl to her room. Rudis really didn't want to go to her sister's bedroom. She imagined those maids who were wearing masks of goodness, but behind their backs they cursed. It was hard to bear. Then the priest suggested visiting the temple of God. He felt guilty before the princess. Although he was not the initiator, he was a participant in the sacrifice ceremony. Bennett offered to help find at least a temporary shelter until everything was sorted out. Even the emperor could not send knights to the temple. The girl sincerely thanked the priest. She was very grateful that he found the strength to apologize for everything. The priests in the church bowed to the guest and led her to the parish living room. They said that it was not often used, and they offered to find some kind of replacement. The room was magnificent. The decoration corresponded to the level of nobility and was worthy of a queen. The bedroom was completely suitable for the residence of a princess. Rudis thanked the clergyman from the bottom of her heart. It was obvious that these people were kind to her, and they sincerely wanted to help the princess. The temple servants left, and the girl lay down on the bed. It had been a very long and difficult day, and there was no strength left. The words of the ancient deity were ringing in his head, about the father kneeling before his daughter, if he wanted the demon's help. It turns out that Lavaine knew that the girl had been insulted and humiliated all her life, and also about her father's dislike and the antics of her younger sister. But there was no understanding of what to do now. Rudis did not want to use the power of the deity, but she could not abandon her people. And, of course, she did not want to become a puppet in the hands of her tyrant father anymore. As soon as she thought about it, something unpleasant happened. The priest announced that the emperor had arrived to see Her Highness. The girl was afraid of this meeting and at the same time was waiting for it. She sat on the bed and gave permission to let her father in. A firm decision matured in her head. From now on, she would rely only on herself in everything and take care of herself independently. The emperor was as menacing as ever. He entered with a firm step and stopped by the bed. But Rudis firmly decided for herself that she would never tremble at the sight of this man again. The gentleman addressed the princess by name, but he was immediately interrupted by a guard who entered. His breathing was rapid. The man was in a hurry to deliver news. The guard told the emperor something about Princess Selene. His face changed. He asked how the servants had allowed this to happen. In the end, he decided to talk to his daughter himself. Selena's room was in unimaginable chaos. Things were scattered, and some objects were broken. The servants asked for forgiveness and bowed to their mistress. The princess was shaking with sobs, lying on the bed. Her beautiful hair was scattered. Her hairstyle was ruined. The girl looked very pitiful. The father's heart was torn to pieces. After all, he was so strict with his favorite. Selena raised her tear-stained eyes and asked what Rudis had done that made her father exchange his beloved daughter for this wretched thing. The emperor thought about it. The reason he had performed the cursed ritual was much deeper. The existence of the empire was at risk. 3 years ago, the first attack from the eastern lands occurred. The mighty power of the empire began to bend under the onslaught of the enemy. The only way to strengthen their power was through the ritual of sacrifice, and then the once undisputed power would return. But Selena brought her father out of his reverie. She demanded that her room be returned, and that scoundrel Rudis be punished for her arrogance. After all, evil should not go unpunished. Father seemed to be in some kind of stupor. The master could not allow the efforts to disappear without a trace, and soon everything had to fall into place. In the new room of Rudis, at the table opposite each other, sat the father and the unloved daughter. The gentleman addressed the girl affectionately, but everything was written on her face. He only changed tactics in order to deceive again. Father offered to try to control the powers of the ancient deity. In return, he offered his love, to the same extent as for Selena. The parent had no intention of singling out one daughter and treating both equally. Rudis laughed at these words. There was always a difference, and there always would be. It was obvious that the father could not love the pathetic nuisance of his life as much as he loved his adored purebred daughter. There was no way to get even a drop of love from this man, and he could hardly be called a father. Rudis was amazed at herself. Never before had the girl been so determined. After the ritual, nothing could stop the princess. The parent was furious. His face turned red, and his teeth clenched tightly. These manipulations no longer made the same impression on Rudis as before. They seemed more like a farce. There were some conditions that the girl was going to put forward to her father. He wondered what it could be: imperial clothes and jewelry, servants from noble families, or punishment for those who treated the girl badly. Rudy said that her father had to fulfill 3 conditions if he wanted the girl to control Mr. Levain. The emperor could barely contain himself. The impudent woman was setting some conditions. His reaction was expected: anger and rage. But if the father wanted to achieve results, he had to humble his pride. Otherwise, his fate was to leave with nothing. Rudis had only 2 cards to play against the emperor, and she was wondering how she could use them. The first of them is Selena. She would be the best candidate for the sacrifice for the ceremony. But the demon had already been summoned. If the ritual was not repeated, this card was out. The second card was the emperor's reputation. Even though Rudis was his own daughter, she was treated like cattle. The clergy and the public could learn about it and react accordingly. And the ruling family feared gossip more than anything else. The subjects could stage a coup and overthrow both the family and the emperor. The coup could have been staged by any of the vassals. For example, Duke Ivana. The emperor was furious and almost stooped to insults, but he only squeezed the arms of the chair with force. This scoundrel wanted the emperor to hand over power to some god, like a snotty youth trembling with fear. The emperor could barely contain himself. Before, I would have definitely hit my daughter. Now I didn't dare, maybe because of Levain. But the girl didn't need anything from this tyrant. No love, no money, absolutely nothing. Now the father could not manipulate his daughter. Therefore, he was forced to respect and treat her as an equal. Otherwise, the dialogue would not take place. After thinking for a while, the emperor agreed. He was ready to listen to Rudis. What conditions she put forward. Although it was very difficult to hold a conversation, pride clouded his mind. The first condition was this: the demon's power would be used only in the interests of the empire, namely, stabilizing the situation and getting rid of monsters. Rudis agreed with this, but the monster attacks worried the girl the most at the moment, and the death of a large number of people. The emperor perked up. So, as soon as we managed to get rid of the monsters terrorizing the entire area, we could move on to other important matters. But the girl interrupted her father and put forward a second condition. The princess wanted to live outside the palace, to get rid of the environment in which there was no place for a normal relationship between a parent and an unloved daughter. The emperor pressed Rudis on where she wanted to live. She wanted to move to the Duchy of Arctis, and everything had to be notarized by one of the clergy. And finally, the third condition. The girl wanted to leave her family in order to protect herself from oppression. To do this, she used the power of a contract certified by the clergy. This would give her some time to finally break all ties with the emperor. The father roared that only an ungrateful woman would hide in another family, hiding behind the church. All the subjects would whisper that the emperor was a monster who treated his daughter badly. The man didn't understand why, of all places, Rudis chose Arctis. But the girl had her own point of view. It was the only acceptable option. Since ancient times, the Duchy of Arctis have been loyal vassals. They would defend the honor of the empire better than anyone else. The Arctis Duchy was the noble and just sword of the empire. It had existed since the foundation of the state. This family avoided politics. Every year, talented knights were released from under its wing, and the current Duke Dulio Arctis is now fighting on the front lines and mercilessly destroying monsters. Princess Celine was in love with the young Duke of Arctis, and as long as she got along with this young man, the Duke of Arctis would not harm Rudis. It was a dangerous choice, but of all the options, the best. Living in the imperial palace, the girl heard a lot about the relationship between Selena and the heir of the Arctis family, Serefis, and she hoped that this young man was like his grandfather. The princess finished her speech and looked at her father. The emperor took a pause and went off to his chambers to think. It was already deep into the night when her father gave his answer. The emperor, albeit reluctantly, accepted the conditions. Perhaps he pretended that he had done nothing wrong before, but Rudis remembered everything. Right now, the future of the people was the most important thing. Everything had to be done before father changed his mind. There was so little time left. The princess had no strength left after today's events. Her eyes were sticking together, and the girl felt very tired. Suddenly, someone's hand fell on the fragile shoulder. Incredible warmth and calm emanated from it. Levane approached completely silently. The young man stood behind and held his hands, as if protecting the girl from all the troubles of the day. He picked up the princess in his arms and carried her to the bed. She was already fast asleep. Her calm face seemed to glow from within. Her skin was milky white. The demon touched her tender cheek with his palm, brushed aside her purple hair. From the outside, these two looked like a loving couple, where the man takes care of his woman. Levane laid the girl on the bed and stepped aside, and quietly said that the sleeping beauty had worked well today. Darkness swallowed everything around. Fear and blood surrounded everyone. Someone called Rudis by name. She was looking for the demon in this darkness. Suddenly, huge yellow eyes appeared before the girl. The bloody face of an ancient deity froze in chaos. The demon asked what she wanted, but the victim didn't know what to answer. What she really wanted more than anything else in the world. She couldn't formulate her request clearly, thoughts blurred, so that no one could ever again. Strong male hands supported the girl lying on the bloody floor. In the princess's chambers, the table was set for breakfast. The sun had already risen high and filled the room with bright light through the large windows. The girl was puzzled as to how she had slept for so long. Apparently, fatigue had taken its toll. The priest reported that, on the orders of the high priest, he had not woken Rudis up on purpose so that she could rest properly. It seems that the princess dreamed of something very important last night, something that much depended on. She needed to put her thoughts in order, and Rudis asked permission to walk alone. The priest bowed and said that while the princess was in the temple of God, she was not in any danger. The high priest ordered to help in all the affairs of Her Highness, and the princess could use any corner at her discretion. From now on, the temple was under the protection of the Almighty himself. Rudis felt free in this place. She even wondered if she had ever felt this way before in her life. Suddenly, someone's voice pulled the girl out of her thoughts. Very familiar. It was the supreme deity Levane. The princess looked around. This garden had always been huge, with cascading waterfalls and a labyrinth of scarlet roses. But the demon was nowhere to be seen. Suddenly, the princess saw him. The Dark One was standing by a huge tree. It was as if covered with ice. The bark and branches were so silvery. The boy was turned to face the ancient tree and seemed to be talking to it. Rudis called out to the young man, and he turned to the call. He asked if the girl had had a good rest. At the same time, a slight smile played on the man's lips. Surprisingly, the princess looked cheerful, despite her restless sleep. The demon said that he knew that the father had visited his daughter. Rudis thought that the man already knew everything. She could not understand this man. Perhaps she would never be able to understand. This man was very caring, and even sympathized with the princess. But he never interfered directly in her problems. Dark seemed to read the girl's thoughts, and noted that he did not dare to go forward, because Rudis never clearly formulated her requests. The demon could only interfere if his mistress knew what she wanted specifically, and voiced it, even in what directly concerns the girl herself. It was easy to say, but the practical side was unclear. Then Levane laughed and decided to demonstrate his capabilities with an example. I asked the princess what her favorite season was. She loved spring the most. And suddenly, the birds started chirping and flowers bloomed. It was some kind of magic. But the demon explained that changing the age of creatures was one of the most refined and simple abilities. The man picked up a withered leaf. He often dealt with death and destruction, and rejuvenation of living organisms was the easiest technique. However, Rudis noticed one very strange thing: that the flowers had blossomed, causing the tree to grow old. The girl asked in surprise. It turned out that Levane could change everything at any time and in any place. He agreed, if only it was within his power. However, Levane explained that his power has its limits, and he is not as omnipotent as he seems. But many wanted this power. The entire empire wanted it, not just the emperor. Rudy's should have thought about what she was getting herself into. So, before that happens, the girl must say what she wants. Otherwise, the demon has no reason to exist on Earth and was summoned from the depths of chaos in vain. But Rudis's thoughts wandered around the ritual of sacrifice and the magic circle, where the weak victim, the princess, sat in the very center. The demon hurried her. She needed to decide on her desire. Then Rudis finally formulated what she wanted: for Levane to save the Empire from the monsters that were exterminating the people. The Dark One smirked slightly. This wish was a little vague, and it was not at all what the princess herself wanted. The demon asked not to lie to herself, not to be an obedient daughter who wanted to save the Empire, and to please her father. The girl did not agree. After all, the Empire's desire coincided with the desire of the princess of this state. But Levane asked her to think about it. Perhaps it would be a stupid request, but for her personally, Rudis never wanted anything for herself. She simply had no right to it. Even when she lived in the palace, the princess had nothing, because she had been locked up all her life and had not really seen anything in life. Levane asked the girl not to hurry, and to think carefully about her wish. When it was formulated, to tell it to the demon. Although there was little time left, the girl thought about her bitter life. All her life she dreamed of leaving the castle. It was a pity that the demon had not appeared earlier. Levane asked why the princess wanted to leave the palace, and what she would do next. She herself did not know. The only great desire was to be free, and that was exactly what the Dark One wanted to hear. The supreme deity heard the wish. He waited 5,000 years to come to this world and fulfill it. The man approached the girl and took her head in his hands. The warmth that had become habitual ran through her body. Rudis nevertheless quietly whispered that it was necessary not to forget about destroying monsters. The demon accepted this request as well. But then the princess had to go with him. After all, the man couldn't leave her alone, and they had to work together to destroy the monsters. Levane warned that his methods were not entirely humane. He wanted the princess to know that, but it wouldn't be hard to protect her. Then Rudy said that they needed to prepare for the trip to war. If the princess left the castle, there would be chaos, and the number of victims would increase. The demon agreed with this. All people depended on each other. Although the population was large, it was difficult to survive alone. This was a feature of human society. Rudis decided to ask for help from the temple and the Arctis Duchy. This would significantly reduce the time to resolve the issue. But until then, Levane had no orders, and he said that if anything was needed, all that was needed was to call the ancient god. The demon would come to the call at any time of the day or night, just as he came from chaos into this world. All he had to do was call the supreme deity. The huge mansion of the Arctis Duchy was surrounded by greenery. Princess Celine visited it. She was drinking tea in the dining room, waiting for the reception. The maid reported that an hour had already passed, but the Duke was busy with urgent matters, and she suggested visiting him next time. The blonde beauty was furious. An hour had already passed since she had been waiting for an audience. This had never happened before. Selena started screaming. No one dared to treat her like that. Nothing could be more important than this lady's visit. It wasn't that they met very often, but it had never happened before. There was no disrespect. Seraphis always greeted them cheerfully and spoke politely. Could the young duke be embarrassed by the fact that Celine was a princess? It was no longer important, since the father began to negotiate their marriage. Suddenly, the maid reported that the gentleman had arrived. The grandson of Duke Arctis appeared in all his beauty. In his ceremonial uniform, the young man looked like a young green-eyed god of war. Selena ran up to the young man, and immediately forgot about all the omissions and grievances. She chirped that she had been waiting for a meeting for a very long time, but he very coldly reported that he could not spare a minute of his time for the princess. He was forced to leave the state, and he came to say goodbye, having learned that the girl had been waiting for an hour. Selena was not used to such treatment, but, having pulled herself together, she asked to explain what had happened. Seraphis agreed, saying that he did not intend to tolerate when someone played with his feelings. The girl did not understand what was happening. After all, a good relationship with the princess could bring a lot of benefit to the young duke, and she could become a sovereign after an alliance with him. That is, in essence, a person who has full power in the state. Without a specific term and conditions, Seriphus bowed silently and announced that it was time for him to leave. Perhaps that was all the talking for today. The princess demanded to know the reasons for the young man's rudeness. He did not respond to such an angry tirade. Only when leaving did he say that he had received a message from the high priest. And now he was heading to the temple. The high priest visited the chambers of Princess Rudis. She asked how things were going with her acceptance under the patronage of the Duchy of Arctis. With a bow, he assured that the duke had accepted the offer. Although at first it did not interest him very much. But by the end of the conversation, he was very furious and accepted all the conditions. The duke himself had gone to war. If it had not been for this fact, there would have been a great commotion. Instead, his grandson, Arctis's heir, Sir Seriphus, was to arrive. Rudis was not personally acquainted with the young man. She had only heard that he and Selina had a rather tender relationship. Bennett reported that Sir Seriphus was the heir and current lord of the Righteous Sword, the Duchy of Arctis, a man who could be trusted completely. The priest reported that Lord Arctis had arrived. Rudis was worried, because it seemed the young man had not been informed of the situation with the princess. Several monks bowed in greeting. They paid their respects to the high priest, the princess, and the young duke. He was very surprised to see an unfamiliar girl in the temple. His emerald eyes grew even bigger in surprise. It was easy to understand why Selina fell in love with Seriphus. Her Highness introduced herself. Rudis Amaryllis. The boy was embarrassed. He did not know who was in front of him. He asked to forgive him for not watching his manners. He said that he had been sent by the Duke of Arctis to serve the princess. And he bowed, kissing the lady's hand. Rudis froze. At the end of the corridor, she saw her sister Selina. She was standing in such a way that she was almost invisible. Selina would never have allowed this to happen before. She was clearly avoiding her favorite, and she didn't want to catch his eye. Perhaps the rumors about their warm relationship were greatly exaggerated. Seriphus noticed how Princess Rudis froze and tensed up. She decided for herself that she needed to figure everything out. For now, she couldn't trust anyone unconditionally. Politely freeing her hand, the girl hurried to say goodbye. The young man said that a place had been prepared for Her Highness in the duchy, and she could stay there as long as her heart desired. He also informed that the princess has been assigned personal security, and anyone who wishes to meet her must obtain permission. Finally, the unloved daughter had a chance to escape from her father. The girl's face showed what a relief it was for her. Rudis asked when it would be possible to move out of the temple, and the duke suggested right now. The girl immediately agreed. Sir Seriphus volunteered to escort the princess to the Duchy of Arctis immediately, and assured that the young lady was in no danger when she was with the duke's heir. The only thing that was disconcerting was the contract provided by the temple. It was simply insulting. By signing it, this young lady was disowning her family. The monks escorted the princess to the carriage and bid her farewell warmly. The carriage was completely ready, and Sir Seriphus opened the door with the golden coat of arms. And then Rudis saw Selina again. She was hiding behind a column and watching what was happening from afar. They had to leave the palace immediately before her sister did something. The carriage drove away from the temple gates. The coachman received instructions to go to Arctis. The priests and the high priest still stood with their heads bowed. This was the first time the princess left the palace grounds. And even there, this bastard was not allowed to go everywhere. The girl looked out the carriage window and realized that this was freedom. Finally, the young duke announced that they had arrived at their destination. The ducal residence was a beautiful palace with turrets and columns. The carriage drove up to the front entrance, where servants were already lined up to greet them. The princess got out of the carriage, but as soon as she stepped on her sore leg, it immediately twisted, causing pain. Seriphus supported the girl, preventing her from falling. But as soon as he touched her, it was as if the young man had been struck by electricity. It was as if something was protecting the princess. Maybe some magic. The young man stepped back and asked if everything was okay. The left leg. It began to hurt again. Rudis became worried. She had only just arrived, and already she was causing trouble to such a hospitable house. But the young man informed her that the lady needed rest. The young man volunteered to personally escort the lady to her room. After all, she needed to rest from the journey. The young duke opened the door to a bright, richly furnished room, and said that from now on, this was the princess's room, and if she didn't like anything, they would immediately find another room. The room was luxurious, richly furnished, but at the same time very refined. It had absolutely everything a lady could need. Sir Seriphus asked Rudis to remain in the room until she recovered. Her leg needed rest and limited movement. The young man knelt down and asked permission to examine his injured leg. If necessary, he could call a doctor. The girl almost cried. She had long since come to terms with her peculiarity, but Seriphus did not know that the trauma had been there since the girl's birth. If the princess decided to stay in the duchy, she had to tell the truth. She said that she was limping not because of a bruise or a wound. This problem has been with her all her life, and it cannot be cured. No matter how hard she tried to step on her sore leg, it simply wouldn't support her body. And every night, for 20 years now, the girl woke up in a cold sweat because of her numb leg. How many prayers were said so that the sore leg would finally be cured? But it was useless. There was no point in treating it. Seriphus listened attentively to the story and asked if the emperor had ever called a physician or healer to the princess. But she repeated again that the injury was incurable. The young man disagreed. To resign oneself when one has tried everything is one thing, but to give in without doing anything is quite another. And then he asked for forgiveness. It was too reckless to blame the lady for this, but he said that he could try to heal the leg. Although the young man was a warrior, he had experience working in a medical unit. During the first expedition to the monsters, he acquired it due to the shortage of doctors. Rudis was a little hesitant, but the young gentleman sincerely wanted to help. He asked permission to examine the sore leg. Asking the lady to take a deep breath, he took her leg in his hands and quickly felt the sore spot. The girl screamed from the sharp pain. Everything was even worse than he expected. Rudis was shaking all over. Her face was distorted by a grimace of pain. His hands on her leg were causing some unnatural pain. Seriphus didn't understand what was happening. But where he touched the princess's skin, it was as if fire was spreading, and she couldn't stand it any longer. It was too hot. Suddenly, the young man saw a magic circle on the girl's body, a clear sign of something supernatural. It was simply impossible, but the princess herself had no idea. All she knew was that it appeared on her body after the ritual. From time to time, this sign glowed and shone brightly. Seriphus thought, if this symbol was connected to a ritual, then the temple had to be involved to find the cause. And now the lady should rest and enjoy a delicious meal. But Rudis couldn't relax. After all, the Arctis duchy that had accepted her was in a difficult position. However, the heir still helped Her Highness, and the girl was very grateful to the true noble protector. Seriphus was perplexed. The princess was too naive. She had only recently been betrayed, and she had already entrusted her body to a stranger. Besides, there was one nuance. The Arctis duchy was currently in conflict with the emperor. But while the war with the monsters was going on, he could not openly threaten. And to end the war, someone appeared from whom power can be borrowed. An ancient deity that is subject to Rudis. Her existence is invaluable to the empire. Seriphus was sure that the princess was aware of the demon's power, but she still thanked the ordinary man, as if no one had ever given her a drop of kindness and compassion. Perhaps it was the result of the emperor's tyranny and cruel treatment, and the princess simply did not respect herself. It seems that the girl was simply intimidated. The young man's fists clenched in anger. Not loving one's own daughter was not a worthy quality for a man, especially an emperor. He was suddenly distracted by a footman entering. The lord ordered to bring the princess tasty food, warm clothes, and to make sure that the fireplace was always burning. After all, it was quite cool at night. The atmosphere in the imperial palace was gloomy. Celine had been in a depressed state lately. The noble ladies-in-waiting were constantly discussing the situation. The young lady of Viscount Rail's family complained that she had suffered enough when she had to settle a ragamuffin in Celine's chambers. And when the emperor raised his voice to his beloved daughter, the servants thought about their terrible fate. Yesterday, all the kitchen maids were punished. The gardener was treated even more harshly. All his property was taken away, and he was thrown out of the palace. The young lady of the Ivana family was also upset. After all, at such times, even the emperor's daughter had no support, not to mention the simple servants. And all the ladies agreed on one thing. It all happened after the summoning ceremony. Perhaps not a very successful one. Lady Esther Ivana casually asked the others what they thought about it. In her opinion, the summoned deity was somewhat strange. Another maid reported that the ancient deity was rumored to only obey Princess Rudis, and there were also rumors that it was not a real deity. Esther listened very carefully. It was important to know what was being whispered about in the palace. Rita Vale continued. Princess Selene did not prevent rumors. On the contrary, she created them. So the rumor that the ancient deity was not real came from Selena. Lady Ivana quickly confirmed that she also supported this opinion. After all, if the god was real, then why did his victim survive? Esther nodded her head. At the same time, she noted to herself that Princess Selene was sowing discord, and also that Lady Vale was very stupid. In her room, Lady Ivana was talking to her assistant Giselle. She was asking what the lady was going to do. After all, the situation was already getting out of control. The girl did not believe that Princess Selena had taken such a desperate step out of jealousy, and her mistress would have a hard time being the princess's companion because rumors were spreading throughout the palace. Lady Esther explained that the problem was not with Selene, but with the ancient deity, and the rumors that it was not real were not true. Before the ceremony, Esther bribed one of the servants, and he confirmed that, after her, the crypt was empty. In addition, Lavaine appeared immediately after the ritual was performed, and the most important thing that must be strictly adhered to is to never cross the path of an ancient deity. Father sent a letter in which he clearly stated this. Do not resist the will of the dark deity, and under no circumstances cast a shadow on his power. The true power of the deity was spoken of in the Alpha. This was the first document, also known as Kitab al-Azif. The Duchy of Ivana and the temple had long maintained good relations, and long ago, the temple handed over this document as a sign of loyalty. The Duchy of Ivana cherished and cared for this relic. The heiress of Ivana had not yet had the chance to read this paper, but, most likely, it contained information about the great deity. The one who helped Rudis get out of the crypt was that demon. Meanwhile, Selena was losing her influence by spreading stupid rumors. Now Lady Esther had something to do, to get rid of one trouble. She called her maid and said something in her ear. In the main temple, a priest was talking to a girl in a long dress. She told him what she knew. The priest cried out that this information was strictly controlled by the temple, but the interlocutor was trying to get confirmation that nothing had happened. The priest wanted to make sure that what he had just heard was true. His Imperial Majesty, accompanied by his retinue, arrived at the temple. The priest bowed, greeting the high personage. The emperor came in a hurry to find out the truth. He addressed the Minister of Faith directly, and he began to speak. 3 days later, at the residence of the Duchy of Arctis, Sir Seraphis spoke with the princess. The conversation was not an easy one. The girl was surprised that he called Hartu. That was the first destination. But this region suffered the least from the invasion of monsters. Rudis knew that Harta was a rich region that had not been touched by death and destruction. The only reason for concern was the financial situation. There were regions that were in the greatest need of emergency aid. Seraphis was in the background. It was not he who was deciding such an important issue. The decision was made at a noble assembly. If Harta could be saved, its nobility would be indebted to the empire. The princess did not want to interfere in the affairs of the imperial court. The main thing for her was to prepare for her own freedom, and yet it was wrong. She couldn't accept it. After all, it would mean sacrificing the common people for the well-being of the nobles. The princess asked the duke's opinion. Did Seraphis support this choice? That Harta was a priority. Meanwhile, in the main building of the meeting hall, a meeting of the noble council was being held. The main delegates of the noble families were sitting at a round table. The emperor reported that Harta was the first appointment for the ancient deity. Also on the agenda was the need to resolve some misunderstandings. The imperial palace had been in a state of discord lately, and it was necessary to resolve this issue at any cost and to establish order and discipline. Everyone at the table started talking at once. Everyone was interested in whether the ancient deity really obeyed only Princess Rudis and whether she had enough influence on him. The emperor looked around at those present. The mere appearance of the ancient deity made many switch sides. Those who had recently trembled before the authorities. His thoughts were interrupted by a servant who reported that Princess Rudis had arrived, accompanied by the Duke of Arctis. The emperor had given permission to enter. It had been a short time since his daughter left the palace. However, it was immediately obvious how much prettier she had become. Her whole appearance said that she was a real princess. Again, there was whispering at the table. Everyone knew that Seriphus was Selena's betrothed, but now he was accompanying another princess. The emperor asked about the purpose of the visit. After all, the ungrateful daughter had abandoned her own father for the Duchy of Arctis. Rudis was no longer the downtrodden girl she once was, and she could not be shamed with such mean moves. The princess said that it was more likely that the father had thrown the daughter out than that she had abandoned the parent. The emperor was forced to change the subject. He demanded to know the reason why Rudis had interrupted the meeting. The girl raised her chin, and in a firm voice, she declared that there was a reason. Instead of Harta, she would first go to Vignode. The emperor jumped up from his seat. Vignode had passed all 5 levels of infection, and now he was at the final stage. It was too late to drive the monsters out. After that, it would have taken a huge amount of money to restore Vignode. Raising his voice, he asked why Rudis had come and interrupted important discussions. Then the girl asked to name the real reason for choosing Harta as the first point. It was the enormous wealth of the local nobility, and not the nonsense about the necessary emergency aid. The princess still demanded to name a good reason for choosing Harta as number 1. Then she would go to this place without delay. Count Cloudon spoke in defense of the emperor. It was wrong to say that the empire abandoned those who needed help just for the sake of profit. Rudis shamed the honorary member of the noble council. It turned out that Harta was in a worse position than Vignode. The count was embarrassed. He said that Her Highness did not know the real state of affairs. There were many valuable resources and objects in Hart. Their loss would be significant for the empire. Rudis countered that it had nothing to do with the common people, and the resources were used only for the false luxury of the elite. Other members also spoke up, that the princess accuses them of cynicism, doesn't know the real needs of the state, and it's better for her to focus on leaving. Suddenly, the door to the meeting room opened, and someone asked everyone to immediately stop making useless comments. A red-haired, handsome man entered the hall. He looked like Atlas, who had stepped out of a painting. The young man asked the girl if everything was okay. The thought flashed through Rudis's mind that it was him. Earl Abbot looked like a true deity. Those present were instantly alarmed. The count was talking nonsense. Perhaps he was out of his mind. But he was adamant. Any passerby on the street will say the same. Helping Vignode instead of Harta would be more beneficial to the empire. The young man looked at everyone present, and added that those present had probably forgotten why they had gathered here. Princess Rudis turned to the emperor and firmly stated that Vignode would be the first destination. The father looked up. He looked at his daughter for a few seconds, and agreed with her, saying that she was right. The princess was slightly embarrassed. The emperor agreed suspiciously easily, and accepted all the conditions, but he cast a heavy glance at those present and explained that everything had been confirmed, and the ancient deity was not a fake. However, the monk reported to him that in some way this deity was not complete, since it did not possess the full power of the gods. In other words, an ancient demigod. Rudis didn't understand why the emperor had changed his mind so abruptly, but the decision had been made, and one thing was clear. She would begin the fight against the monsters with Vignode. The question immediately arose of when the princess was going to leave. There was no time to waste, and it was decided to leave the next day at dawn. But the emperor was very categorical. No matter what difficulties his daughter faced on the battlefield, there would be no help from the imperial family. Rudis understood something from the look of His Majesty. He did not believe in the power of the ancient deity, and he was sending his daughter to certain death. Perhaps that was why he accepted her conditions. If nothing had happened in Vigneaux, Rudis would have become a pawn in a chess game again. The Arctis residence was covered by evening twilight. The maid was busy helping Rudis. She gave her a warm blanket, because the night promised to be cold. She also reported that the whole day was spent preparing the crew. Everyone hoped that the journey would be safe. Therefore, the lady should not worry. Butler Arian brought food supplies for the journey and some things. He presented them to the princess with respect, saying that this was all for a comfortable journey. Rudis had never been courted like this. She was used to getting by with little. That's why she was very embarrassed by such attention. But he said that the servants had prepared the crew of their own free will. Therefore, he asked not to refuse and not to offend them. The girl almost cried. These people were so kind, even though because of her, their only heir was forced to go to the very hell of the empire. The butler replied that the entire Arctis duchy was very grateful to the princess, that she was very brave and agreed to fight the monsters. After all, the duke asked many people for help. There was not enough money, troops, or resources. At first, many helped, but only to show false participation in solving the problem. Once the situation worsened, it became difficult to get Arctis to support them in return. Supplies were cut back, but even that was wasteful, and aid was cut off altogether. Weak support still remained, but rather out of pity rather than fulfillment of allied obligations. The duchy alone bore the burden of defending the empire, fulfilling a common duty to the people, while others neglected it. Rudis thanked Arian again. She was ready to join the fight. And then the duke would not feel alone. The princess woke up when the sun had not yet appeared above the horizon. Thoughts about the expedition did not give her any rest, and Rudis decided to go out onto the balcony to breathe fresh air. It was quite chilly, and the princess wrapped herself in a warm cloak. Suddenly, someone from behind said that it was still early and it was time to sleep a little. It was Levain. As usual, he was very calm. He thanked him with a smile for giving him a personal horse. Seriphus had prepared a good steed. Rudis looked at the young man very thoughtfully. After all, the ancient deity did not need this whole horse thing, but Levain just wanted to feel like a human. The princess was very worried about the upcoming trip. Would it go smoothly? Moreover, her father's words did not give her any peace. After all, he refused any help. The girl looked through the old books that the temple was able to provide, but she did not find any mention of the power of the ancient deities. Levain asked what the beauty was thinking about. She told him about her worries. Even if it was dark with them, it didn't mean that everything would go smoothly. But the demon laughed. He laughed without stopping. This was not at all what the princess should be thinking about at the moment. He said that she would soon see for herself. As long as the ancient deity was nearby, the princess should not worry. Fear and hope flashed in the purple eyes. Sitting in the carriage, the princess turned over in her head Levain's words. He was sure that there was no need to worry about the power of the ancient deity. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the carriage window. Sir Seriphus informed her that the border had just been crossed. From that moment on, they were outside the capital. Suddenly, the princess's attention was drawn to the sky. Blood-red flashes were visible in the direction where Vigneaux and Guihéme were. These two regions had reached the final stage of destruction, and the changes could be seen even from such a distance. Although they were 10 days away, the princess urgently needed to figure this out, and she called Sir Seriphus. He directed the horse to the carriage. The girl asked to clarify what the term final stage meant, and the warrior agreed to explain it. The Empire assigned one of 5 levels of contamination of the earth by monsters. There were no casualties at the first stage, but the red energy slowly began to spread, and people suffered from fever. At level 3, people were already dying. Migration from the contaminated area to other areas was prohibited. Entry into the affected region was restricted. When the area reached the 5th level, the monsters fully settled in. The weak people were hunted. Only adults were left alive. Rudis assumed that the 5th level was the last. But Seriphus explained that the information was classified and secretly transmitted by the military to the imperial palace. This knowledge was strictly controlled. There was also the so-called final stage. It meant that the monsters began to perform ceremonies. The princess turned her head and saw Lavain in another window. He was also listening to the young warrior's story. He only added that people seemed to understand that their end had come. That's why they called the stage the final one. Rudies couldn't understand how monsters could perform ceremonies. After all, they were inferior creatures with very limited intelligence. Lavain also couldn't help himself. He wondered why the emperor was silent about all these matters, and especially about the ceremonies. The girl did not understand why these ceremonies were needed at all, and how monsters could conduct them. Seraphis sat with his head down, and Lavain just chuckled. The two men knew what was going on. Finally, the Dark One explained everything to Rudies. Monsters perform these ceremonies to turn people into their own kind, into monsters. These ceremonies were called the final stage. If they were to be held en masse, the entire human race would gradually disappear. That is, they would be replaced by monsters. And so they will devour the cities one by one. In the end, when everyone has become a monster, the empire will be defeated. They stopped for the night in a forest clearing in a safe place. The men made a fire as the night was cold. The princess was very upset. Sleep was out of the question. She could not believe that the empire could fall overnight like that. The young duke came to see if everything was all right. Seeing how upset the girl was, he apologized. He should have told her everything earlier. But Rudies asked not to apologize. After all, there was no time for that. It was necessary to think through all the details. The girl was worried about what would happen to people who had already become monsters. Most likely, there were already some like that in Vigneaux. They would most likely just be killed. Rudies asked Lavain about this. She asked if it was possible to turn those who had already become monsters back into humans. The ancient deity did not know this. Perhaps something was known to the real God, whom the priests served. However, God did not interfere in the affairs of people. The focus had to be on helping the citizens of the empire who were in pain. Rudies knew what it was like to be abandoned. For many years in the palace, that was exactly how she lived. People who found themselves in exactly the same situation as the princess were ignored. And in all likelihood, they would have to be killed. It was too much of a burden for the fragile girl to bear. A hand in a brown glove lay on her hands. The young duke understood how difficult it was to endure this, but he was there, and he asked not to take everything on his shoulders alone. The warrior sincerely wanted all the monsters to be destroyed. To do this, they had to endure sorrows and hardships together. Sir Seraphis strongly recommended that the princess sleep while she had the chance, so that she could think clearly tomorrow. The young man looked into the princess's eyes. It was as if a green sea had touched the purple sky of her eyes. It seemed he wanted to say something else, but he just silently got out of the carriage. There was no strength left to stay inside. And Rudies also decided to go out and breathe the night air. It was quite cold, and dawn had not yet even broken. Suddenly, a man's hand fell on her shoulder. A cry of fear escaped her mouth from surprise. Of course, it was Lavain. His eyes were slightly narrowed. He was not asking, but asserting, that it seemed that Seraphis had visited the princess that night. He also assumed that the young duke was saying some pleasant and tender words to the girl. Rudies opened her mouth in protest, but the demon interrupted. Saying that he had merely assumed it, Rudies suddenly thought that there might not have been a very good relationship between Lavain and the duke. For a while the young people were silent, and they just looked at the fire. Each one was thinking about his own. But suddenly, the ancient deity spoke to Rudies in a quiet voice. He asked if she liked gentle words and good deeds. The princess looked up at the Dark One. It seemed that he had become interested in human nature. She confirmed that all people were pleased with warm words. However, the young man's gaze was very serious. He asked her not to listen to the empty words of the pompous air. The only one Rudies really needed was standing in front of her. The girl wanted to say something, but they were interrupted by a warrior who approached. He said that it was time to move on. The days on the road flew by, and on the 10th day of the journey, Sir Seraphis reported that they had arrived at the entrance to Vigneaux. From there, they had to go on foot. Standing in front of the castle gates, Rudis was horrified by the terrible picture. The half-destroyed fortress wall seemed to be painted with blood, and instead of air, there was a red haze. The young duke ordered the rest to wait for his signal rocket. If it was blue, they had to wait for the group to return. If it was red, they had to run away immediately and report everything to the emperor. Lavaine turned to Serapis, offering to stay outside with everyone else. But the warrior made it clear that he was going inside with the deity and the princess. A terrible picture opened up on the streets of the city. Rivers of blood flowed along the ground. Buildings were destroyed. Skeletons and skulls lay right on the streets. Vile slime was everywhere. The princess looked at this picture with horror, and she understood that there were probably no survivors in this hell. However, the demon did not agree. The sky had not yet completely turned black, so the ritual was not over. And, probably, someone else was still alive. Rudy scolded herself for not acting sooner, as soon as she learned of it, but the young duke asked her not to blame herself. The preparations had taken some time. The girl was determined. She asked where the monsters were, so that she could quickly head there and save the surviving people. Sir Seraphis immediately swore to see the princess off immediately, but suddenly a red mist began to creep up on them. It became difficult to breathe, and the girl swayed and stumbled. Lavaine managed to support the young lady. He held the princess tightly by the shoulders and let go only after making sure that everything was okay. It was getting harder to breathe. The demon was not human, and the young duke could not catch his breath all this time. He offered to carry the princess in his arms. The girl felt helpless and worthless. The warrior picked Rudis up in his arms. The Dark One followed him through the red stream of blood. The princess was thinking about how she could gain strength, at least a little strength. Finally, the duke announced that they had come to the place where the monsters had gathered. The former palace was covered in slime and blood. The walls and towers were half ruined. The sounds of songs that enveloped all of Vigneaux came from this place. But the building was inaccessible. Serapis suggested that they would have to break down the door. But Lavaine quietly said that it was not necessary to do so. Rudis turned to the demon. She asked what alternative method he proposed. Lavaine asked the girl to give the order as soon as she saw the monsters. After all, the supreme deity had arrived here to fulfill the princess's wishes. And to begin the action, he needed detailed instructions. It was only necessary to try to formulate and give the order clearly. Just one word was enough, and the princess asked. She ordered the door to be unlocked. The supreme deity was waiting for this very much, and he instantly fulfilled the wish of his princess.